This lesson for the photography class is on depth of field and aperture. What is depth of field? The depth of field is the area in which objects are in sharp focus. So the area can be a small area where objects are in focus, or the area can be a larger area, as in everything within the camera's view is in sharp focus. So depth of field is the area in which objects are in sharp focus. That area can be smaller or larger. The thickness of the area depends on the size of the aperture hole. And when we're talking in tutorials and we say the word aperture, you should begin to automatically translate the word aperture with the word hole. That helps me to understand when I read other tutorials and things out there and they say it's a large aperture, I think to myself, do they mean a large number? Or do they mean a large hole, because they're opposite of each other? Most often they mean aperture. A large aperture would mean a large hole, not the number. So if you just learn to immediately think hole when you hear the word aperture, I think it helps a lot. Depth of field is also often referred to as DOF. DOF. There are three factors of depth of field, or DOF. Three factors that affect it. The smaller the aperture, think hole, the thicker or greater or deeper everybody who talks about aperture has a different word, different terminology, and it gets really hard for people new into this to grasp it when everybody's using so many different terms. But the smaller the aperture hole, the thicker, greater, deeper the depth of field. So making the hole smaller makes more things in focus. The further you are away from the subject, the thicker, greater, deeper the depth of field. So if you are taking a photo of the mountain and you have to get far away from it to get the entire mountain into your composed shot, you're so far away that you're going to get a thicker or greater or deeper depth of field. So this is easy to see when you're talking about a mountain, but when you're talking about a flower, remember that, or a person, remember that if you want to get more things in sharp focus, you're going to have to pick up your tripod or your camera and back away. If you are wanting to get things more blurred out in the background and actually have a shallower depth of field, you might want to pick up your camera and get closer to the subject. And the third one is, the wider your lens, the thicker, greater, deeper the depth of field. So wide angle lenses, and we learned in the last lesson a little bit about focal length, and you looked up the focal length for your camera. Wide angle lenses have focal length somewhere, they start at 35 millimeters. 28 millimeters is a common one, and 24 would be a really nice wide angle lens. But even if in your camera, if you think about, you remember that the focal length, when we changed the focal length, we were zooming in and out. So you want to be zoomed in to have the widest lens to have most everything in focus. When you zoom in, you're going to have less in focus. So those are the three factors, and you want to come back to this slide and listen to it several times, especially after you go through the rest of this video. Shallow depth of field. The wider the aperture hole, the wider the aperture, the smaller the number. So a 3.5 would be a smaller number, which makes for a big hole. The thinner or the shallower the depth of field. Now, this is so confusing because everything is opposites, and until you get out there and actually play with your camera over and over and begin committing these things to mind and know which way to move the little button slider on your camera to make it do whatever, practice. That's what I'm trying to say. Practice is going to make this all seem much easier to understand. But this is the basic concept. The wider the aperture, which is a smaller number, the thinner or shallower the depth of field. And here's a graphic I have for you to help you understand that. Here's our camera, and it's focusing at this subject right here. And we have a 3.5 aperture, which is a nice big round hole. And this is going to give us a shallow depth of field. So between the lines here, that's where things are going to be sharp and in focus. And as it goes out, it's going to get blurrier. And you can think of, for those that are familiar with the Gaussian blur in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, it helps me to think about this as the bigger the hole, the more chance the things are going to have a Gaussian blur going out to the edge, where the edge is going to be blurrier than the center. And so the bigger the hole, the more chance you have of the blurring around the edges. And so therefore you have a shallower or thinner area that's going to be in focus. So come back to this slide and study it a little bit later after you go through the entire tutorial. This may help you. Deep depth of field, or thicker, or whatever the other words we were talking about. The smaller the aperture hole, or the larger the number, like an f16, the thicker, deeper the depth of field. So a small hole has a thicker depth of field. More things are going to be in focus. Here's our image again. I have here the camera. It's focusing out here on the subject. So we have an f16, which gives us a smaller hole. So there's less of an area to become blurred out on the edges. So more is going to be in focus. So you see the deeper depth of field. There's a wider space between these two lines, so more of our subject is going to be in focus. So that's a deep depth of field. It goes down deep. It goes from here down deep to here to be sharp and in focus. So the smaller the hole, the less chance of blurring, and everything's going to be sharp, and you're going to have a deep depth of field. It just seems like it to me, if when I think about it and I analyze things, it would seem to me that if you have a small hole, that you know, you're letting in less light, and it would be harder to get more things in focus. But if you look at it from that view, like you do, imagining it's a Gaussian blur, the bigger the hole, the more chance the edges are going to be blurred. the smaller the hole, the less chance of blurring. That's the way I kind of like to look at it. So let's review again, because this is a very difficult concept because of all the opposites. Maximum f-stop. Remember, your maximum f-stop is your lowest numbers. Your maximum f-stop with the lowest number is your minimum depth of field. So the wider hole edges blur. Minimum depth of field, maximum. So there's a whole lot of opposites in there. Here we go again. Minimum f-stop with a high number equals the maximum depth of field, or a smaller hole edges are sharp. So you can use whatever kind of memory trick you want. If you want to focus on just if you want to focus on low number, minimum depth of field, high number, maximum depth of field, and think of it that way, jot it down. Make a note of it for your cheat sheet. If you want to think of it, maximum gives minimum and minimum gives maximum, okay, commit that to your head. If you want to think maximum, wider hole blurs, maximum and wider are both the bigger. If you want to do minimum and smaller hole, smaller holes are sharp. Whatever little memory trick that you can use that will help you best remember, jot that down. Take whatever parts of these equations here and jot them down in a way that's going to help you remember, because everybody learns differently. So here I took a ruler outside onto my table and I used the f-stop 3.5 to take this image, and you can see, because the 3.5 gives me my biggest hole, and you can see here in the middle of my ruler everything is very sharp, and then as it goes out this way and it goes out this way, things are blurred. It gets more blurred. Look how blurry the edge is right here on the little clip of the ruler. And so this is a very shallow depth of field, because things in focus are the very shallow area, not a wide area, a very shallow area, a very thin area. Sometimes they call it a thin depth of field, is in focus, and the rest is blurred out. And so that's your small numbers, which gives you the big circles, big holes. Let's go on. Deep depth of field, or wide depth of field, or all those greater depth of field. Same shot, f20, which gives me a very small hole. Now you can see almost everything is in focus. So we have a very deep depth of field. We have it focused all the way from the back to the front, and you can see how much the clip is in focus here in the center. So go ahead, get a ruler, go outside, go inside, go anywhere. You don't have to go outside just because I did. I went outside because the lighting was better. But get a ruler and get your camera out and put it on a white piece of paper like this so that it will meter a little bit better, and play with it, and then come back inside and do like I did and look at those properties of each of the photos that you took. As we learned in an earlier lesson, you can do that in a number of programs, or you can do that right in your Windows system, and that's why I taught you that early on, because you're not going to be able to analyze your results once you get them back onto your computer unless you have a way to see which pictures were which ones. And so do that, go play, take a lot of time at this lesson. So let's watch the dSLR movie. This is our lesson on depth of field, and I have my digital SLR, my dSLR here, and if you look at the top, I am set on the aperture priority mode, which is AV, and for right now I am on auto focus. I'm going to let the camera do the focusing. So I'm going to pick this back up and turn on my live viewing. And I have here in my yard a garden ornament with some flowers in the background, and even beyond that some trees. So there are at least 2 depths, many more, because the flowers, the rose bushes actually go backward. So we may be able to see some more depth of field that way once I download these on my computer. But this here is my aperture setting, and I'm going to scroll this wheel here. And you're going to see it. The lowest right now is 4.0, and it's going to go up to 29. Now that, of course, is based on what I have my lens zoomed into. It is zoomed in now to about 40 millimeters, and so I can read that on this dial up here. And so, as we learned, based on your distance is your available aperture, and this is the deepest depth of field where it's going to get the most in focus. And this is the hole that is the smallest hole in the lens. So I'm going to go ahead and take this photo, and you can see that everything is sharp and in focus, no matter what the depth, because I had that on the largest aperture number. Now let's go back and change this, and as I'm doing this, my hole is slowly, I don't know what size it is, but it's slowly getting bigger the lower number that I go. We're going to take it down to about 10, and I'll try this again. And you can see a little bit going out of focus here in this one, but it didn't make a whole lot of difference. So let's go and make our aperture hole larger, but our numbers smaller. Keep going down. Let's try 5.6. I do that from time to time. We're at 5.6, and I'm going to hit the right button this time. Oh, now we're getting a little bit of depth of field. You can see how this flower is not so much in focus, the ornamental one, but yet the ones in the back are still more so in focus. So I'm going to go ahead and take this all the way down to the bottom, as low as it'll go, which is 4.0 for this millimeter distance. And I'm going to take the photo, and you're going to see that it is really blurry up close, and actually the trees up here in the far distance are the most in focus currently at this time. This is when I need to turn it on manual focus. So I'm going to change it from AF, from autofocus, to manual focus, so that I can choose which part of my image I want it to focus on.
So I want this, let's say the ornamental flower, which is closest to me, to be in focus, and I want everything else behind it to be out of focus. So I'm going to put my square on here, and I'm going to turn my, well, I don't need to do that, I forget, that's the other camera type. I'm going to turn my dial. This is my focusing dial. I'm going to turn my dial until what's in the front is in focus, and I'm going to take this picture again, and you can see now that the ornamental flower is in focus and everything in the background is out of focus. Now I'm going to do just the opposite, and I'm going to turn my wheel up here until the flowers in the back are in focus, but the ornamental flower is not in focus. I'll take that picture again, and now you can see, whoops, the flowers in the background are in focus, as well as the trees back there, but what is in front is not in focus. So when you have, the bottom line is, when you get down here to the lower numbers, you can change your focusing ring and either blow out what's in front of you, or what's in the foreground, or what's in the background, depending. And this is really great for macro. Of course, you have to do some testing of the various apertures to see what they do till you find the one that works best. What you could do is to turn it to the program mode and turn it on and hold down halfway on the shutter speed to see what it suggests, and this one suggests an aperture of 7.1, and that's why we weren't seeing too much of a difference between the 22 and or 29, whatever it was, and the 10, because the suggested for this particular setup is 7.1. But then when we got down to the numbers below 7.1, we were beginning to see that we were able to blur things out. So you can do a little test on the program mode and then turn it back to your AV mode and start at a setting near that one, 7.1. And if you wanted everything to be in focus and really sharp, you could stay there or go a little bit higher on your number. And if you wanted to work on blowing things out, go below that number. And so I hope that all makes sense to you. And it's also got a high ISO of 800 right now. I think I set that manually earlier because it was fairly dark outside until I got my histogram right. Anyway, I want to see what you can do to get depth of field out of your camera.
Okay, so let's close this out. And it's taken a minute to come back up because I have so many things running on my computer. So we watched the movie, and let's look at a few of the images. Here is the image where the f-stop was on 29. Again, I downloaded these photos I took during the video and looked at the properties, and this one was an f29, and you can see that everything is in focus. So it has a deep depth of field because everything is in focus. And let's look at the next one. This is one taken at f4, so it has a very shallow depth of field, but I manipulated the image using the manual I'm getting tired. The manual focus, and you can see that I focused it so it was focusing on what was closer to me, which was the flower and the lawn ornament, and the background is nicely blurred out. This is the most common use for depth of field and the way people most think of depth of field, especially if this flower was a person up close and then everything in the background was more blurred out. And the next one is the exact same shot at f4, but I took it so it focused on what was out here in the excuse me, in the background. So you can see the trees are in the very far distance are really in focus, but the bushes are not quite as in focus, and this here in front is really blurred out. I could have changed that maybe so that maybe these roses were more in focus, and then the trees and this were more blurred out. I just take some practice and some playing. So let's watch now the point and shoot movie, and this is going to take just a moment to open up, so it'll begin playing.
Here we are with my point and shoot, and my point and shoot does not have an AV mode. There are some point and shoots with an AV mode, so if yours has that, certainly do your practice based on the previous video. However, that doesn't mean that you can't get a, what I like to call a fake point and shoot, or I mean a fake depth of field with your point and shoot cameras, and it's not a true depth of field, but when people see it, if they don't know any better, they would think it's a depth of field. And so basically what I'm going to do, I have it on that spot metering, and if you forget all about spot metering, go back to the several lessons ago where I shared that, and I told you that we'd be using this again in the future. Well, this is that lesson where we're going to be using that spot metering. And so it's only going to meter off of what is in the center. And I've got some roses. This works for a little better for me when I get up close, more of a macro shot. And I'm going to change it, move this around till the center of the camera where the box is pointing to what I want to focus on. And I'm going to hold down the shutter speed, or the shutter button halfway. And you can see I have a 4.9 aperture at 1/100th of a second. And I'm going to go ahead and move it and compose it so that flower is on the 1/3 line, and finish taking the photo. And now this flower should be in focus. Now if I want to get something further in the distance in focus, I'm going to point it to that, and you're going to see it's still 4.9 aperture, but the shutter speed is now 1/50th. Now I'm going to put that back on the 1/3 line and push down the rest of the way, and now you're going to see that it is clearer in the background and more in focus, and the flower in the front is out of focus. So by using your spot metering, that obviously did not change the aperture. In this particular instance, I have had it change the aperture in the calculations rather than the shutter speed. So you have to just find that right setting. It doesn't always work, but you can get it where the background is more blown out and the foreground is clearer. If you just keep moving your camera, move the distance of your camera, move the zoom of your camera, and play with the auto spot focusing, you can get depth of field of sorts in your point and shoot camera. So I look forward to seeing what you can do.
Okay, so we saw that you cannot get a true depth of field in the point and shoot cameras, but you can fake it, trick it to get it. My camera, my point and shoot camera, before I even got my dSLR, I could really manipulate that one. It worked really well. This one doesn't work quite as well, but you can still work to try to manipulate the light. Let's look at a few photos that I took while I was out there playing. So we are at an f5.9, which is a fairly large hole for this camera, a large aperture, and I did this so it focused on this flower here, and you can see there is some blurring in the background. Now I probably could have stayed out here and played a little bit more and used maybe some of the other factors, such as getting closer to the image with the camera, getting further away from the image with the camera, and continued playing till I got it some other results. But you can see this is not too bad for depth of field. This could get more blurred in the background. I have been able to do that with my point and shoot before, but I think it was raining out there. We actually got, you can see the water droplets right here. We actually got a little wet while we were recording. And you can see the thorns are pretty sharp even right here. But if you look at the next one, which is f.9, you can see when I got the same aperture setting, you want to try to get one that focusing here or there, that has the aperture number fairly low. But then I focused out here, and so I tricked the camera, and now this rose that's in the foreground is blurred out, and what's in the background is all nice and sharp. But you can see the bit difference also in that it manipulated, whoops, wrong way. It manipulated the light because it's changing the shutter speed in order to do what it's trying to do. And so this one was actually darker and this one was actually lighter. And that was because of the change in the shutter speed, but also the change in where I was focusing the camera. And in this case I was focusing out here, so it was metering out here also to make that better. So when you are pressing down the shutter button part way, you have to remember that it's not just focusing on where you tell it to focus in these point and shoot cameras. It's also light metering. It's adjusting both of them. And so your results are going to be affected by that, and you're not going to be able to have as much control as you do in the DSLRs, but you can get the effect. You can see here with this point and shoot that I did get the effect. Of course, you can always change it in Photoshop Elements if you don't get the effect you need, and that's going to be the next lesson. But let's go ahead and look at this next slide. You're going to remember these cheat sheets that we made for our cameras, and I said I would come to it in a different lesson, and that's this lesson. See the large hole? We have a shallow depth of field and a blurred background. Shallow meaning it's going to focus in a smaller area and the backgrounds can be blurred out. And for the smaller holes, we have the deep depth of field and everything is sharp. So that's on this side. So when you're out there taking your photos and you're having trouble remembering, you can look at this cheat sheet and see the big hole and the notations and know that these smaller numbers are going to do those things. And over here the small hole with these notations and know that the larger numbers are going to do those things. So that's how you can manipulate, or not manipulate, but utilize your cheat sheets when you take them out into the field and have them with you. And so I want to see your examples of depth of field or any of your playing as your lesson for this. Now that you're done watching this video, go back and watch it again and really learn these things. Take your time. Go out with your cheat sheet and play, and then your lesson is to share with us your results in playing. Of course, come in, tell us what your aperture was after you look in your properties, and so share what your aperture is when you share your results. And I can't wait to see what you guys do.